Good evening. Our host again tonight is my good friend, Peter Maw. He's been both a national and a chapter member since the beginning of 1993 and was our chapter president for several years. His presentation this evening is the third part of his 18-day trip, taking him from Harlingen, Texas to Florida and ending at Miami. Tonight, he will take us from October the 17th to the 25th of 1986, starting at the Tyndall Air Base. His presentation was very well received, and I know his final presentation will be anxiously anticipated.
Late last year, I gave you the first part of my trip across the southern U.S., and I broke this trip down into three parts. This is actually the second presentation, but is the third part of the trip. The second part was mainly set up for the Regina scale modelers and had a lot of color marking schemes from different aircraft. And tonight I thought you people would like to see some piston engine airliners while they're still in service. This is part of a Fly Past magazine tour. And tonight's will take you from October 18th, 1986 to October 25th, 1986. On the night of the 17th, we left Tyndall Air Force Base at Panama City and went to Tallahassee. And next morning we flew into Orlando, picked up our rental cars. And the first order of business was driving out to a little town northwest of Orlando called Zellwood, where they have a small grass strip and they had for hosting an antique aircraft fly-in. So here's a general view of some of the aircraft. There's 5 Stearmans and a Bird CK in this picture. You could walk right up to the aircraft, talk to the pilots. I don't know how you got to ride in them, but we didn't do that. Amongst the aircraft there was this Tim N2T-1. It was built in 1943 as a naval basic trainer, equivalent to a Cornell. This one had a molded plywood fuselage. This particular aircraft was going good until 1989 when it ran out of fuel and put down on the road where it hit a car. And it was heavily damaged. It's since being undergoing restoration by a different owner. This picture is kind of dark, but it was a dark blue and black airplane. It was a Lockheed 12. It's said to have been RCAF 7642 during the Second World War, but the serial numbers don't match up with anything else. This particular aircraft was used in a documentary about what's her name, Flew Around the World.
Amelia Earhart.
Yeah, that's her name. That was her maiden name. Her married name is Putnam. She married Clyde Putnam, the publisher. And this gives you an overall view. You can see the in the background and is the runways. In the underneath the large trees in the center left is the parking area, and the taxiway is on this side. In between the taxiway and the runway was a ditch that where we warned of just don't go near because it's quite often inhabited by rattlesnakes or alligators. I didn't see either one of them. And here's a nice view of 3 Stearmans doing a fly past. This is a very rare Bruner Winkle bird, CK. Bruner Winkle only lasted about 4 years. It started in 1928 and then the Depression hit. But the Bruner Winkle bird is the type of aircraft that Charles Lindbergh taught his wife Anne to fly in. This is probably the most modern aircraft of the fly-in. This was a Pite and Paul air camper built in the 1960s. And you can't see it too well on this view, but the whole front cowling was sheet brass and polished to a mirror finish. And in the background, you can see some Stearmans and Wacos and travel airs. This Waco, I know nothing about. I did not record the registration. There's also a Beech 17 there. This one is currently still on the civil register in the U.S. with although a different owner, but still based in Florida. Waco ASO is, I didn't get the year of manufacture. Oh, 1928 it was built. And it was unfortunately crashed in 1991 on a tourist flight. They were zooming alligators in the Everglades and that were not able to pull up in the one pass. Next to it is this Travel Air 4000. It was another 1928 product. Travel Air was formed by 3 people you might have heard of. Their names are Cessna, Beech, and Stearman. You have to pause there and let somebody in to talk. Here's another Travel Air. If you've ever seen the movie Dawn Patrol, either the 1930 version or the remade 1938 version with Errol Flynn, this is one of the aircraft used in the flying sequences. They used several of the Travel Airs modified with this type of tail, and they called Wichita Fokkers. For ground aircraft, they actually used some preserved First World War German and British fighters. This aircraft is currently flying in New Zealand. It a 1940 Waco UPF 7. The next day was actually a day off. We all went to Disneyland. But on the morning of the October 20th, we got into our vans and we drove down to Kennedy Space Center. And we all signed up for the bus tour. And although nothing was flying at the time, they had the Space Shuttle Atlantis was out on the pad during our weather tests. We then had lunch and went to the nearby Titus Coco Beach Airport, also known as Tico Airport, and where we were hosted by the Valiant Air Command. This was their pride and joy at the time. The P-25, nicknamed Chapter 11. And if you've ever seen the movie Battle of Britain, this was used as a camera ship. At the time, it had a different nose, it was sort of a hemispherical plexiglass nose. It was painted up in quite garish orange, green, yellow, with black and white stripes. And it was nicknamed Psychedelic Monster. Across the field across the tarmac was the one and only Bird Innovator, which is a 4-engine conversion of a cancel. I say cancel because my information is this used to be RCAF number 9746. It's been since bought and restored to cancel or Catalina configuration. And I'm not sure if it's flying or just housed. Valiant Air Command had just taken possession of 2 Danish C-47s. This one is still in Danish markings except for the US registration on the tail. The other one they had started working on had the engines off. This one is now owned by Kermit Weeks and is held at his Fantasy Flight Museum at Polk County in Florida. And that's NJ5, which is a US Navy version of a Harvard or Texan. In the background, you can see a tail of a Beech 18, a Beech Mentor, and the other Danish C-47. One of their members had just bought this T-28C. And you can see that they went through great lengths of painting out the US Navy markings on the side, which was a legal requirement. Although they seem to have just abided by the letter of the law rather than the spirit of the law. Not only can you see the training wing 5 markings, but you can see on the nose as their Davis Monothon storage code, ST140, and on the tail is a TA176, which was the auction number. That night we spent at Cocoa Beach, motel, and then the next day we drove. The only stop was at Palm Beach Airport. And we were guests of Florida Air Motive. This is one of their DC-3s. This was built as a DC-3 in 1941 for Eastern Airlines. And I think it is still current on the US Civil Register. Air Motive was just in the process of cleaning out and dismantling this old hangar. Looks like to be Second World War vintage. Pelican Transport had 2 Beech 18s nearby. This one looks nice and shiny, but it just come out of a rebuild because they had a gear collapse. One of the problems with Beech 18s was corrosion in the drag strut link. And this one was not inspected before it collapsed. I took this picture in 1987 or in 86. In 1987, it crashed in Miami, still with Pelican Transport. And it turned out that the weight and balance had been fudged. The aircraft was 955 pounds overweight, and the center of gravity is 14.5 inches behind limits. The pilot had also been suspended a few times earlier, and Pelican was under investigation for pushing its pilots to do illegal stuff. Right next to it was this other Beech 18, which had a damaged tail at the time. This would also crash, but this was in February of 2000. It was on a flight from Bahamas to back to Florida. They switched tanks, and then one engine quit, and the other engine was not able to maintain altitude. So they called in a mayday and ditched about 50 miles east of Bimini Island. And the two occupants got out, and there's a roof hatch right about where this radio antenna is. And the U.S. Coast Guard sent out a Falcon jet before they ditched. We found them fairly quickly and guided in a rescue ship. And both occupants got out with only minor injuries. The next day, we did a couple of stops. This was October 22nd, and the first aircraft we photographed was this Lockheed Lodestar. In 1987, this aircraft flew around the world to commemorate Howard Hughes' round the world trip in Lockheed. And this one is still on the Civil Register. A Grumman Mallard was nearby. It's registered to Viz Air in Nassau, Bahamas. It is currently on U.S. Civil Register rather than a Bahamian register. This is a Tallman's Company B-25J camera ship. You can see behind the map on the underneath the cockpit a whole list of movies that it photographed. Some of them you might remember is Catch-22, it's Mad World, Memphis Belle. At one time it had a boom that could drop down out of the bomb bay with the cameras on the side on it. And if anybody ever got to Expo 67 in Montreal, and they had the Circle Vision 3D at the telephone pavilion, this is the aircraft that shot a lot of that 360-degree films. It was Disney's pioneering effort. They then went on to do more movies that are still being shown. This aircraft is still flying, although now it has a standard bomber nose, and it goes under the name of Pacific Prowler. C-123 with a shady past. Just before we photographed this, it was said to have been over in Africa flying for something they called Operation Chieftain, doing clandestine cargo runs. It is now with a company in Arizona, still on the Civil Register. These were all at Fort Lauderdale Executive Airport. We then moved on to Fort Lauderdale International, which is nearby. The Royal Australian Air Force had two Convair 440s. They sold them off, and this one went to several owners. When I photographed it was with Dadita Air in Florida, doing charter passenger runs. Next to it was this C-46 Commando. This one at one time served with Civil Air Transport in China, which was a CIA-run airline running out of Taiwan and into communist China. The paint scheme is from the previous owner, American Flyers, although at this time it was owned by Florida Air Leasing. It was then taken up by the U.S. Navy Museum in Pensacola, although they sold it off to private interest. It's still being restored. This DC-4, which is being rebuilt. It had suffered a gear collapse when it was landed with engine problems 2 years before I took the picture. It was then made flyable and went to California. Last I heard, it was on display at Naval Air Station in Miramar in U.S. Marine Corps markings. DC-6, actually this is a C-118 version, owned by Carolina Aircraft Corporation. It went through several owners before it went to Alaska. And this one actually crashed in Cold Bay, Alaska. I forget the date. This was 2011 or thereabouts. They were on a positioning flight into Cold Bay, and the pilot was pointing out the local landmarks to some crew so they could take over the flight. And everyone got distracted, and they forgot to lower the landing gear. And as far as I know, it's currently sitting at Cold Bay. Nearby was a whole collection of aircraft in various stages of repair or disrepair. This rather ratty looking Grumman Goose was a spray painted registration on the tail. It was actually flying 2 years later. Next to it is a nose of a next Canadian C-47. Nearby was this Martin 404. And on both the left-hand side and the right-hand side, you can see noses of more Lodestars. There was a maintenance stand there nobody's using, so I got up the top and took pictures from up there. And when you think of the term corrosion corner, which actually refers to Miami Airfield, this is what I think of. It's all these aircraft waiting for rebuilding. There's Beaches, Martins, Douglases, Lockheeds, there's an Aero Commander, two Aero Commanders, and some other stuff. This Lockheed nose you see would belong to this guy. This was actually one of the few surviving Lockheed 1649s. That extended wingtip with her wings with a square wingtip without the tip tanks. This one is still in existence. It is now painted Lufthansa colors, and it's in storage with Kermit Weeks' facilities at Polk County in Florida. That is Fantasy Flight. Although I think their plans are to move it back to Germany. Also on the field, this Neptune, which at the time was owned by International Mailing and Printing Corporation as an executive transport. It is now back in U.S. Navy markings, preserved at Jacksonville Air Station in Florida. I think it'd make a great personal transport. This Lockheed Convair 990, the world's fastest jetliner until the Concorde. This was built for American Airlines, and then went to Galaxy Airlines. And the last owner was a group called Christ is the Answer, and they had just parked it, and they were waiting for scrapping. You see the Neptune in the background on the one side, and another Grumman Albatross in the background on the right. That evening, we got to Miami, went to a hotel, and early next morning, oops, forgot to watch this last airplane. This is a Lockheed 749, the original version of the Super Constellation. And this was in the markings of its previous owner, Aero Sakasta. It was scrapped in 1990. As I was saying, that evening we got to Miami, and then the next morning, bright and early, we went out to Watson Island, halfway between Miami Beach and Miami. The causeway goes across the island. You can see the old Miami Herald building in the background. Just to the off the screen to the left is a Miami cruise ship docks. Watson Island had a seaplane base, and at one time there was a big dirigible mooring stand with about 4 or 5 mooring stands, which are now underneath a children's museum. At that time, CAHS was still flying regular scheduled passenger flights by seaplane to Bahamas. And so we all flew out to the Bahamas that day on this aircraft. And you might remember these aircraft from the opening sequences, the original Miami Vice, which was filmed about the same time as we were there. So we flew out to Miami we landed in between Nassau and the Paradise Island. And on their seaplane base was this aircraft. I keep wanting to call it a Grumman Mallard, but this is actually the a Scan 30, which is the French-built version with the Continental engines. This one is still in the American Civil Register. Oh, no, it isn't. Not this one. This one went to Red Bull in Austria and landed on a lake and sank. Everybody got out. It was since recovered and is waiting restoration. There's our aircraft taxiing out. If you look closely, the gear is in the midst of its being retracted, and it's NASA across the water. At that time, there was no bridge. You had to take the ferry back and forth. Not too long after we were there, they put in a bridge, and then the owners of CAHS, which I think was Hotels International at the time, built a small stall airstrip, and they started flying from Miami to Paradise Island using Dash 7s. They've since built hotels on that airstrip, and they fly in and out of the regular international airport, just to the south of the city of Nassau. On the way back, it was a 2-stage flight. We had to stop at Bimini Island. And so instead of going into the terminal, a lot of us just stood outside and schmoozed with the ground crew and took pictures. This is actually one of my favorite pictures from the trip. This aircraft is currently operating out of St. Lucie County Airport in Florida by under a different owner. The next day was another full day. This was October 24th, the second last day of the tour. We started off going out to what is now Miami Executive Airport. In those days, it was called Tamiami Airport. Kermit Weeks had his large collection there at the time, although he has since moved after his facilities were destroyed by a hurricane. I think it was Hurricane Andrew. And many of the aircraft, including this very rare Douglas B-23 Dragon was damaged. He had things like a B-17 that was dragged across the tarmac by the wind. Several were flipped upside down, and anything that was there was damaged, even some of the stuff indoors. That's why he moved to Polk County Airport, farther inland. We were invited into his restoration hangar, and they were just finishing off this P-51 Mustang. I took several pictures inside the museum, but my flash wasn't working, so they were too dark to show. So we wandered around the airfield for a while, and here's this Honduran registered Percival Pembroke. This is formerly owned by the Belgian Air Force. Belgians sold a lot of them down to Honduras. Many of them were taken up by civilian owners, and U.S. Customs seized them on drug runs. This was the only one I know of that wasn't seized. It is currently in Michigan, still in the American Civil Register, although on a different registration. And it now carries a solid nose rather than the class camera nose. Belgium used them for photo reconnaissance. This C-47 was once owned by Hudson Bay Oil and Gas, and then went to Eastern Provincial Airlines and Atlantic Air Cargo. And I'm not sure what happened to it. We then popped into our vans and drove out to Miami International Airport to check out Trojan Corner, which was the northwest corner of the airfield. At that time, they were still running large piston engine transports. The first one we actually stopped and photographed was this Transair Link DC-6. This one was actually owned by Canadian Pacific Airlines at one time, and it was registered as CFCZE and named Empress of Toronto. Transair operated it for quite a while, and when they took it out of service, they actually cut the nose off almost back as far as the wing and donated it to the Houston Aircraft Terminal Museum on the west side of Houston Airport. The museum is in the 1930s Art Deco terminal, which was used quite often for documentaries and movies as a period terminal building. I'm not sure if the nose is in storage or on display. But if you look up the registration, you can actually see pictures of it being dismantled. We then moved on to a company called Argo Air, which was still operating these ex-US Air Force C-97 cargo transports, as well as 707. You can see the tail of one of the 707s in the background. And here's another C-97. These are registered in the Dominican Republic. We then left the airport and moved across the road because we had an appointment at the George Baker School. George Baker School is an air maintenance school, mainly catering to Central and South American clients at the time, but they had a nice collection of old aircraft, including this very rare version of the F-84. This was an RF-84K. You can see by the camera nose, it was an RF. The droopy tail was because the reconnaissance aircraft were modified to be carried as parasite aircraft under a B-36 bomber. And there's a lot of problems with that concept. It never went past the experimental stage. I'm unsure of the subsequent history of this particular aircraft because it does not show up in my list of aircraft on display, and I cannot find a list of the aircraft still at Baker School. I do know this one is still there. This is an A model Skyhawk, and it's I know it's there because it's now preserved and on a pedestal out in front of the school. It's even visible on Google Earth. In amongst her collection was this former Hurricane Hunter C-118. Nearby, when we got back to the main airport, there was NOAA, the National Oceanographic Atmospheric Administration, had one of their hurricane hunting P-3 Orion aircraft there. In the background is CP Air, which we never got close enough to get a good view of. We then traveled over to the north side of the airport in amongst the piston engine aircraft. This particular C-47 was once RCAF 10911, and then it became Canadian Forces 12966. Went to the US, and then it went down to Colombia, where in service there it ran off the runway and was damaged beyond repair. But that was in 2018, so it was a pretty long-lived aircraft. Nearby was this former Air Florida Martin 404. And a DC-6. Wasn't too long after this, or they quit using the large piston engine airliners for their cargo runs to Central and South America and the Caribbean. So I'm glad I was there when I was. I have no information on this one. I cannot read the company or its registration. And it did not show up in my notes other than DC-6. This is a DC-6 B freighter conversion, and it's registered for ASA in El Salvador. This one lasted another 2 years before it was destroyed. This is a ratty-looking DC-4 or C-54. It was owned by Tiger Leasing on on lease to Dow Chemical Corporation, which you can barely see on the nose. It then went to Lynch Air Tankers in Montana, and then is down in Australia now and preserved. We then packed up and went back to the hotel. The next morning, we traveled out to Opalaka Airport to the northwest of Miami. It's still part of Dade County. Opalaka was founded by Glenn Curtis in the 1920s. I guess he got tired of New York and He moved south, started a town, built himself an airfield, which was soon outgrew. So he moved a couple miles south and built another airfield. This one was expanded many times over and was once known as Miami Naval Air Station, and now Opalaka Executive Airport or something like that. It had a shady past as well. The whole airfield, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, they had staged an entire airborne battalion at this airport. Here's this nice Convair 440. This was Eat Air, and it's in Southern Express markings because they had it on lease. Nearby was ex-Capital Airlines Viscount, which is in GO transportation markings. It was broken up in Tucson in 1993. This C-47 was old South Air Services of Puerto Rico. It is now with Skydive Arizona, still being used. Unfortunately, we could not get across the field to see some of the other interesting aircraft. The reason being is that the Miami Air Show was on that day at Opalaka Airfield, but on the south end, where all these aircraft were at the north end. So I do not know the history or registration of either this Constellation or the Convair next to it. We did, however, see this cancel. This was once owned by Questor Surveys and then went to White River Air Services and then down in the US. And I don't know what the subsequent history was. Nearby was this C-17, ex-US Navy, based in Midway. Here's a shot of the full aircraft. This one was registered in 456WL. It was then re-registered with an N in front of the Navy number. Then went back to 456WL. Then it was registered something else. And it's currently on a different registration completely, but it's still serving in Alaska. Probably doing fish hauls. That seems to be the big thing for your Preston airline or aircraft in Alaska. As I said, the Miami Air Show was on. So we moved down there. And amongst the aircraft doing fly past was this Pan Aviation 707. I'd like to thank Greg Putz for pointing me to the registration for this one. Pan Aviation was owned by very shady characters with an unpronounceable name. If you want to know who it was, look up Merchant of Death in Miami. He was a very famous arms dealer, and his son ran the airline to do the cargo runs, shipping his arms around the world. He was finally nailed for having unregistered machine guns and rocket launchers in his Miami hangar that he was trying to sell to Saddam Hussein. Amongst the aircraft on display was Kermit Weeks' private air runabout, is Grumman Duck. I actually watched Kermit taxi in on this one. Military aircraft included these Marine Harrier, Marine Corps F-18 and some U.S. Air Force F-16s. And not to be outdone, British Airways did a fly past in this Concorde. This Concorde is actually preserved in Barbados. And I saw pictures of it not too long ago. It still has all the British Airways first class dining in there. China and everything else is all in there. The Marine Corps was in the midst of repainting their aircraft from solid gray into this two-tone paint scheme. This OV-10 reconnaissance aircraft was the first one I saw in the new scheme. Making an appearance was a T-2 Buckeye from off the USS Lexington in Pensacola. Regina members will remember Jack Ambler. As a young airman, Jack was a co-pilot on a C-47 and was tasked with dropping supplies to the paratroopers at Arnhem. His aircraft was then came to Canada and was preserved in Comox. And I ran into it in 1986 when it was still in service with 402 Squadron. It actually dropped the Canadian Forces Skyhawk demonstration team that day. And believe it or not, they were the only things on time for the whole air show. They were dropped right at the start show, and then things dragged out from there. And as a result, we could not see the whole air show because we had to leave. Also making his appearance was the U.S. Army Golden Knights parachute team, and they were using two leased F-27s. I don't know which one this one was. I was able to blow up the nose code, but it doesn't match either the registration or the Army registration, so it might be the contract maintenance markings. We then had to pack up and leave because it was a British tour and the Brits all had to catch a flight late that afternoon back to Heathrow. So on the way out, we stopped at the Coast Guard station. They just had these brand new Dolphin rescue helicopters have been delivered. And being Miami Air Station, they called them the Miami Dolphins. Next to that was one of their Falcon search and rescue aircraft on both these were on alert. We then packed into the vans and took the Brits off to the airport. And then George Pick and one other gentleman and I went back to the hotel. And next morning we flew out. We flew to Miami, to Houston, and then I went on to Calgary from Houston, and they went to LA to catch a flight home. And that's the end of my talk.